Aaron's going to do his magical cleanup of things, but there's also a lot of information out on the office hours piece that how you signed in, but we'll send all that information out. And out front, there's a piece of paper that's got QR codes on one side and all of the slides about SBIR, STTR on the other. So, all right, that was my housekeeping. So thank you all. Welcome to Office Hours. SBIR, STTR, Decoded, what it is, what it isn't, and what it can be. I'm Karen Giesel-Mullis. I am Director of New Ventures, and I am the lucky moderator today. And Office Hours began in April 2023. We have served over 500 participants. It's an in-person educational session. We hold it every second Tuesday of the month, except for like January when it snows. It's just real when we have a lot of events. So you're welcome to come back again and again. We love an audience. Okay, so without further delay, Jeneane Braden is one of my panelists. She is Associate Vice Chancellor for the Research Integrity and Ethics at WashU. She oversees research conflicts of interest, research integrity, animal care, research security. She's an active member of the professional organizations, including the Conflict of Interest Academy. Jeneane is here for a very important reason, because as you think about this is not just another grant. This is a company. There's going to be different rules, different stuff. So first punchline. Ed Lahue is one of our entrepreneurs in residence at WashU, and he helps technology startups and expand our innovation efforts. Ed is the master of the business canvas and the concept that you need to understand the problem you are trying to solve before you have the widget that's going to solve the problem, because they might not be a match. So Ed and I worked together for 4 years since then. And he's retired and came to work with us. And he's just a whiz at teaching all of us how to speak to human beings. Veronika Redmann is an entrepreneur and scientist who leads 2 companies, including your medical writing company, but you now have a new company, Crane.
Yeah, I believe by Crane Group.
Crane Group. Yep. She is a person that when you call me and say, who should I talk to about SBIR, STTR, I always say Veronika. She is, in our company, are whizzes at the actual application process. They won't help you with the part of what problem are you solving, all of that. That's why we have a whole team. So and I should have said that you also are an EIR with Arch Grants and you teach these workshops. So let's start off, Ed. What are SBIRs, STTRs, and what are they not? Just the one sentence.
Okay. Well, the simple thing is it's a federal program that's actually going to offer non-dilutive funding or to drive both technology or science as well as commercialization. So it's almost really both a research grant as well as a commercialization grant. In some cases, it's a contract, but it's actually the largest non-dilutive fund out there. That's my one sentence. I think it actually 2 sentences.
And the difference between an SBIR.
Oh, okay. So the main difference, SBIR, both a company and entity still does both of these, but the SBIR allows you to partner with a research institution like WashU or to be a federal lab, where the STTR actually requires it. It's really part of the gestalt, if you would, of that program. It's really designed for, ideally, for researchers coming out of university who want to create a startup. So I think the key thing that we're trying to drive home today, because we had a lot of interest since it got reauthorized, is this is not a need just to say, hey, my R1 grant ran out, so I need more money. So let's do an SBIR. Now, that might make sense if you said, hey, my R1 grant out, and I now want to start a business, and I can get funding through the STTR program. But we don't want people to think that this is just a way to go out and get more research dollars. I think that's the key thing that I want to emphasize right up front.
Do you want to talk a little bit about award caps and what does it fund? Like phase one?
Yeah. So basically there's really two phases. Some agencies actually have kind of a 2B. They'll tell you there's a phase 3, but there really isn't. But phase 1 is typically like for NSF is about 305 is the limit. NIH is about 311 and some change. Oh, they don't round numbers. It's like, I can't remember the exact number. I think it's $311,524.
We are believing you.
So you believe in me?
Yeah.
I think that's pretty accurate, actually. Now NIH does offer a 2D, which can get phase 2 for NSF is 1.25 million, and for NIH it can be up to 2 million. Now NIH also, even for the phase 1, if you've got something that they're really, really interested in, I've seen people get up to $700,000 for phase 1. But the idea behind phase 1 is feasibility. Who would approve, does this really work? So you've got a hypothesis, particularly from a technical standpoint, and I need some funding just to prove it on a small scale. Phase 2 is really more about R&D. So we're doing product development, we might be doing clinical trial. So keep in mind, NSF not let you do clinical trials. So you want to go to NIH. NIH is where that is. That can be up to 2 million in a phase 2. But then you can actually do a 2B. I think I've seen that as high as, but it's another Veronika, which is science 2B.
Yeah, and there's both now a breakthrough award and LGB. So there's kind of these different flavors, but the inflection point between them, besides the amounts, it's that one of them, I think it's a breakthrough require there's matching. You have a matching fund in hand to go with your NIH awards. But I think the breakthrough itself, which I believe is the matching one, that one would be like 20. Yeah,
just 30 million.
Yeah,
but keep in mind those are going to be far and few between. So until you run out and get a $30 million grant, they're only the larger agencies, and they're really for something very specific that they're interested in doing. Now you might hear phase 3 sometime. That's really more for like now it's called Department of War. I didn't name it. It should be with Department of Defense. Don't come yell at me like that name. They actually have a program where you're essentially doing phase 1, phase 2, and then you do phase 3 is essentially a contract where they're going to buy the product from you. Where NSF and NIH are not in the buying business, right? They're trying to drive more innovation, but they still want to be concerned about your commercialization, particularly NSF. NSF is almost all about commercialization, but they want cool technology too. NIH, I would say they're probably a little bit more equal, probably a little bit more in the science. They'll tell you don't have to have a PhD, but that's a lie. It's a PhD, whether you get an NIH or somebody on your team does. I thought that was funny because every time we go to the SBIR conferences, they'd say, you don't have to have a PhD. I'm like, this is NIH. What are you talking about? Infectious diseases. You got to have somebody as an expert, right? Involved in that. Anyway. I digress.
That's all right, Veronika. So kind of explain the architecture behind like the phase 1, 2. What does that look like?
and talk a little about like cost. Do you mean like timeline and people and collaboration? What that looks like?
Any part of it?
Any party? Okay, all right. Collectively, try to not go too far with explain. Ed talked about a phase 1, that kind of beginning feasibility grant. They're generally 6 to 12 months. Some of the agencies are starting to give even a little bit more of a window for phase 1 work. So what that looks like is either you as a company getting started with feasibility work where you're getting with quotes, or you're hiring people that are going to be doing a set of work that you as a company are setting up to do. Some of that might be contracted out. An SBIR allows partnership with the university. So if someone has an animal model that you want to test something in, you can partner with them to do a portion of that phase 1 work with them. If you're doing an STTR, there's where the requirement is for working with a federal lab or a university, where a good chunk of the budget for an STTR is going to go to the university. The big crux to think about when thinking overall, even at the smallest level about a phase 1, is that those budgets and the amounts that Ed is talking about, those include both direct and indirect costs. So you may have to modify how much you want to do when you think about how much of that overall budget is going to be taken up by indirect costs if you're working with the university, for example, where it could be more. That being said, not all universities are the same. There are some universities that actually will waive their indirects for a phase one STTR as an example, because they want to drive innovation. So they're trying to allow companies to have more room to do the work. So there can be kind of some differences there. In terms of collaboration, one of the things that when we're talking with the university crowd, but also people that are a mix of backgrounds, is that for both SBIRs and STTRs, team compositions are going to be evaluating what kind of conflicts of interest they have. So if, for example, you have a university inventor spinning a technology out, there's probably still going to be a need for that inventor to try and find someone that's going to be able to be on the company side, regardless of whether they're doing SBIR or STTR. So there's still an aspect of building a company, even at a phase one level. It can't all be contracted out.
And the company is actually the one that's applying, right? Not the university.
Yeah.
The university is just supporting that as a sub-awardee.
Yeah, even in STTR, that's a very common misconception, is that if the PI is with the university, then it must be the university submitting an STTR. It's still the small business.
Yeah, and it does have to be a small business. There has to be an LLC or state overseas or to become an overseas. Yeah.
I just had two quick questions. One is that if you're giving an SBIR, what happens to direct costs if there's no university?
Yeah, so the business benefits as well by having their own indirects. So you get the option of deciding how much to take on indirects. If your company has never done business with the federal government before, the default is the 40%. So we went through a little legal thing last year in 2025 around that, where universities in general are kind of concerned about their F&A rates. SBIR, STTR had the same kind of up in the air, not so sure what was going to happen, because historically it had been 40% unless you've negotiated a different rate. So that's kind of just the default of starting. And so the F&As that are part of a SBIR, STTR are then the not project specific costs. They're then considered costs for operating and running the business while doing the project. So it's kind of a cushion area of the grant that you could decide, are you going to ask for the default amount of 40% of your overall project costs, or are you going to ask for less for some reason if you think you don't spend more on direct costs, as an example?
All right. If you were going to have one difference between an STTR and an SBIR, what would that be?
I think the thing I like to point out to people, most people are familiar with the fact that you have the advantage that a faculty member can serve as a PI of an STTR and not leave their faculty position. But the thing that to me is more critical about an STTR over an SBIR is you get a larger percentage of external costs with an STTR that you can contract out than an SBIR. So if we use phase one as an example, a phase one SBIR, you can have a maximum of 33% contracted outside of the company for work. But if you were to do a phase one STTR and find a way to partner with the university or a federal lab, you get as much as 60% of your costs that you could spend outside of your company. So depending on the kind of work you need to do, that could be a real big difference for some people with what they're laying out, where they may feel more restricted, or that they're going to have to do more stuff in-house if they're doing a phase one SBIR. So that's my most important thing to get across to people, that even if you think your PI structure is going to be the same, whether it's SBIR or STTR, it's just going to be the first employee at the company. That difference of 60% versus 33% can really help people.
NSF's the one exception to that, though.
Yeah.
For the PI has to be employed by the small business. And generally, there's a co-PI that's coming from the university, but you would have to take a sabbatical to be the PI. Where NIH allows you to just still be employed by the university. There's still some requirements about how much time.
Yeah.
You still have to have some dedicated time to the project.
And since we mentioned this, WashU, if you're active, you have an active lab, that's going to have an impact, which is learning out conflicts of interest here to talk to us, because your lab is not the company's lab and vice versa.
Speaking up.
Let's talk about
person.
can you be a PI for your own small business and a PI for WashU on the same sample work.
And I'm talking about, I know, a loaded question. I'm never going to give you like a really black and white answer. I'm just going to own that right now for you. Right. It's fast. So for what, and I'm talking about for faculty. So for phase ones, generally that can be allowable. Faculty have up to 1 day a week for external activities. The COI committees recognize that the company is usually relatively new, shiny little startup. So, and it's short-term money, that type of thing. So generally that is allowable. I'll add a little bit of nuance on the SBIR, STTR side. So for SBIR funding, a lot of times you need to be 51% at the company. And you mentioned kind of taking a sabbatical. So just to say, there's eligibility expectations. So at the med school, you have to have a TAP appointment here. So if you're 51% of the company, that's not possible. Other schools have lower amounts, but generally that's something that needs to be navigated. If you're tenured and you want to reduce your appointment, well, you're going to have to give up tenure. So that's clearly a factor, or maybe there could be some conversations for a leave. That really depends on your school, on whether that's allowable. So the STTR tends to be a little bit more of the favored option because that doesn't have that expectation. So for phase ones, generally it's okay. Human studies are always going to be a little special. And if you're at that point in a phase one, we need to have some earlier conversations with you. But generally it is okay. Phase two is where it gets a little more complicated, and if you ever sit down with the COI office, they're going to talk about the best thing you can do is set up clear lines between the company and WashU. The cleaner you can make it, the easier your path is going to be for COI. So that's where we generally they won't allow you to be the PI on both sides. You have to choose. Generally, if you have a subcontract to your own lab and it's your company, we're also going to be looking at your C-suite roles. And again, we want you to be on one side, not to say you still can't have an ownership in the company, have a role at the company. We're just trying to be very careful about the research activity. So that's where things get a little more complicated.
And contacting COI. How do you do
Yes. So we actually do the teamwork. There is, and you will typically get a human being if you call, which I know is sometimes rare nowadays. So we have staff that are available to speak with you. And when I would advise, look, come and sit down early, have a brainstorming, talk about different paths, different ideas, what might work, what might not work, right? Have those conversations. Then, go away, start working on what you want to apply for. What I say is before you apply, come back and say, okay, this is my concrete plan right now. Because sometimes, you can have those early conversations and then things get a little disconnected and then the application gets submitted. And then you're coming back to us and saying, well, I submitted it this way. And then, the CERC and the COI office are like, well, it's not quite what we talked about. So let's kind of figure it out from there. So, right. So checking in definitely before, the application goes in is a great path just to say, is this an alignment? Are we good? Are there any challenges? Things like that we need to navigate. Because the sooner that the COI office can get involved, it just helps you form your path, right? Versus trying to come to us at award and sort it out. And then we may to say some things too that you're not going to be thrilled about making those types of choices. And they don't want to do that, right? They want to support this as much as they can as well. So that's really something I always ask everybody, and just, check in even we have a few faculty that have to start companies, and they know, and they just kind of have a regular check-in with the office and say, hey, here's what I'm doing. Here's what I'm thinking. And the staff is always happy to have those. Yeah, just to tag on a little bit on alternative strategies. One of the most important inflection points is trying to figure out who can be the PI at the grant. And I would say definitely within the last 6 months, that's become even more challenging because of NIH putting limits on how many proposals a person can be PI on. And not just that, they're also pretty limits now with the reauthorization on how many proposals a small business can put in. So there are more kind of restrictions coming in there from NIH's side as well on this. And so one of the earliest conversations when talking with your group is often of who can be PI and how creative can we get about this. So can we see if there's a postdoc in either the group immediately with the faculty who could have been PI that can be a PI on this grant? Is there someone else that has shown interest in the company, or is there some conversation with maybe some venture fellows or someone else in the community to kind of learn what options do we have for PIs that are outside of who we've immediately thought of right now on this project?
I would add for COI for like postdocs. Those are conversations to have, because there's also WashU as a general expectation that our postdocs are going to be fully employed at WashU, right? So if you want like a partial appointment versus a postdoc just leaving the university, those are conversations because those are extra approvals and things that we need to get set up in advance.
Yeah. So when someone like a grad student or a postdoc is part of a meeting that I'm in, one of our first points is saying you need to understand what your own university's policy is on having other employment, if it's going to create a problem for you, either educationally or professionally, and just getting in front of that and understanding if it's even an option, because it might not even be an option, the path that we're thinking about. The other thing I like to throw out, it's not currently active right now, so it wasn't immediately reactivated after reauthorization this past spring, but it has been active in past years, is that in the same way that there is an academic keyword of trying to raise scientists to their own independence, SBIR STTR has the same mechanism. This is relatively new. It's only a couple of years. It's not all of the NIH institutes and centers, but they do have this pathway that's called the SBIR STTR career transition. NCI generally has only offered it once a year instead of a rolling deadline, but a lot of the other institutes and centers that are participating there has been the same omnibus kind of deadlines as what we're generally talking about omnibus. So that is forecast to have its first deadline for January. So that is a really great mechanism for a postdoc in a group if they're ready to transition into being at a startup, for them to secure the funding for that jump in a sense. That program even has a fast track mechanism where you would be doing your phase 1 project in the lab of your mentor. So again, let's say it's a postdoctoral mentor at the university and then transitioning to being an employee at the company. Yeah.
Does that require, is it more like a K99 or like a KO1 where you require a mentor?
It does require a mentor. Yes. Yes, correct. So you write like a career development plan for this one. You identify mentors. It's slightly different in the types of mentors because they both want and again, depending on which institute or center you're applying to, one of them wants both a technical mentor and a business mentor, and one is fine with just one mentor that's broadly across those groups. So it really depends on where you're looking at. I love telling people about that program. I've helped quite a few number of people apply for that one and won some of them. And so that's a great way to help people that are already interested in jumping from academia into the startup world.
And a totally loaded question. Can I be the PI on the sub-award to WashU and own interest in the small business? Do I need conflict of interest to weigh in on that?
Yes, to your second question, absolutely. But the first part, yeah. So you can, it does depend more on then if there's, your engagement, potential engagement and research on the company side. That's where, the COI committee is going to want to say, no, you need to focus your energy on the WashU side. And that's usually okay again for the phase 1s. Phase 2s, yeah, it depends on the situation. That's a conversation I'm going to tell you about.
All right. So we've talked a lot about small businesses. What does a small business eligibility look like? Number of employees.
Yeah, it's basically under the way the SBA defines it, it's under 500 employees. So you probably don't have to worry about 80 to 500. So it's pretty broad. The big challenge that some researchers have is 51% needs to be owned by either a U.S. citizen or a permanent resident. So when challenges where they don't have that, and so they can still be on the grant, they can still participate, but they cannot it can't be a property owner, as an example. So that can be a challenge if they're the ones that think they're the owner, and then it's going to be hard for them to get SBI. The other requirement is all the R&D. Remember, this is the U.S. federal government giving you money to create jobs. So remember, that's always think about that. So they also want the R&D to be done here in the U.S. So if your favorite programmer is in India or somewhere else, that's fine. They have to physically come here and do the programming on U.S. soil. Also, the research facility needs to be controlled by the entity, and or unless you're doing a partnership where that's part of your agreement with WashU. But essentially, the rule of thumb I say is you got to have keys to the door, right? You can't do this in your basement. It doesn't look good anyway for the viewers, but it just looks bad. But the whole point is they want you almost kind of like what she mentioned with the university. Once you focus on university work, the grant people who are giving out grants want you to be focused on the grant during the grant period. So I think that's where they want to be. They also want to be clear how much time are you going to be able to devote to this. Just like they want you to be serious about, we've got a lab, we've got office space, whatever it is, all of that kind of relates together.
Yes.
All right. Any question? Again,
Sorry, is that an issue for computational startups? Like, if you're entirely computational, do you need a physical lab space, or can you?
Yeah, you can just go to T-Rex or Cortex.
So they do want to
they
see that
still do want to see you like
Physical space.
taking a physical space where you're doing business out there. Yes, correct.
Yeah.
So even though you could code it all at home and do it all at home, they want to see you as like starting a business and being. I was trying to explain this actually this morning to a company out of Texas. They really don't want you operating virtually. They want to see you making an effort to put yourself in an environment like CIC or like T-Rex, where you're going to be interacting with other entrepreneurs and having people in proximity to help you solve problems at a business level, at a technical level, whatever you run into while you're operating. Go ahead.
Question. So you talked about physical space in the Cortex.
Mhm.
So our projects need a lab, resources like equipment and everything. How should we find those resources to do our research?
Yeah. So a couple of options. The obvious one is create a subaward where you're paying for space. You're maybe engaging collaboratively with a scientist at the university. Some people are lucky enough that they have a faculty that is allowing them to have a scientist come and kind of collaboratively work in the space and share some of the equipment per se. So maybe you need just a certain kind of centrifuge, but the rest of the equipment, like you're okay, you can find access to elsewhere. There are like shared lab spaces per se where you can rent a bench. There's some other examples. Biogenerator. Yeah. So there's some other options on renting lab space. You should not be setting up a lab in your basement, your garage.
Can the PI use
Go ahead.
PI use their space and equipment?
Yeah, so there's some shared lab facilities where you will have access to hoods that you book for a time, and any of the companies leasing in that lab space can share those hoods or whatever, let's say, or chemical hood or something like that.
But
Yeah,
I mean, if
yeah.
you're the PI, can you use some of your lab space?
Oh, I see what you're asking. I'm gonna let
I was gonna say, I'm not influenced. So we need to be pretty careful on how we navigate that. So, we have allowed instances when there's a good reason, of course, not just convenience. You don't want to walk down the street kind of reason. That, we can, we'll set up a facility use agreement on occasion to navigate using that particular equipment. So that is possible. And that also, and I think I'm jumping ahead of one of Jeneane's questions about time in now with this. So yeah, and that even goes for any type of other type of support. Like if you were wanting to get your grant administrator to help with submitting the grant application, that's not okay. So that can only be done with special approvals as well. And I think also like if you want to use cores, those have to be navigated carefully as well. We want to be very careful that if you're engaging with a core, you're being transparent that you're engaging with them from your small business and not as a faculty member here at the university or researcher.
Would this involve the chair also? The department chair?
Yeah, they would they would also get disclosed through the COI process. Because there's other considerations. We would even probably loop in the JROC team as well, because they would write up those contracts, just to make sure we're all in agreement and have a good understanding of that, what's the expectation. So we also typically won't see like a long-term arrangement, right? These are typically more like short-term, kind of an immediate need until the company gets a bit more established. There are also instances where you could have a service agreement as well. And that kind of, again, reduces like the F&A costs, but there are rules around what's a service and what's not a service, right? So those are all things that would need to go through the COI process. Then we get contracting and then we go to the chair for approval.
My generator is 30,000 square feet of lab space, office space. You can get a suite, you can get a cubicle.
We're outside Joe and Lexi here with a CIC, just like we're down to
Line space. Not sure, but that's a way to get, especially if you're just applying to things like MPC, where you need to have real mailing address, not your home.
Yep.
We can provide your space to buy a generator so that you can expand as you move up into.
Then for a business also, you have to have an EIN number. So, I mean, you could do this. I don't recommend it. You could do sole proprietor, use your own social security number, but most people just go ahead and just do a simple LLC to get started. Downstream, you're going to probably, if you want to get investors, you're going to be doing a C Corp. But you don't need to do that right away. That's very expensive. I usually recommend people just do a simple unknown journey. So don't write this down, but just do a simple LLC. Do it. Get your EIN for the IRS. It takes like a couple. But also, there's a process of getting registered with SBIR.gov. So you want to do those things ahead of time. It's free. Don't go out there and there's people out there that'll say, "Hey, pay me $500 and I'll get you set up." Sam registered this system award management. Don't do that. You can do that. There's also resources that can help you with that if you need it, that are taxpayer funded. So that's the other requirement that's part of that.
Yeah, and just to throw into, we're at WashU, so obviously we're talking about WashU, but federal labs are another source of access to facilities and equipment. So some people will be looking online at potential collaborators that might have special equipment that they necessarily wouldn't have access to, that you could by partnering either through SBIR, STTR, or with federal lab. The wonderful thing about partnering with the federal lab is that often it includes some of the employees' time that work in that facility because they're already taxpayer paid. So in a sense, if you did partner with them, you're really not paying for their time. They're willing to give their time on the project.
Very common, like Department of Energy.
Yeah.
So if I need a wind tunnel, they're not going to finance a wind tunnel and your SBIR for $305,000. So you basically go partner with them, and as a taxpayer, you have access to that. You have to usually set up a CRADA, a cooperative R&D agreement. That's very common, especially in Department of Energy. See that?
Yeah. Or if you're doing like agri-tech stuff too, that like USDA. Yeah. Yeah.
I have related questions here. So you spoke about the federal labs. Do they also have federal lab facilities for cell culture style work or like animal work or things like
Some of
those
the
facilities?
Yeah, some of the national labs do some life science research. Yeah.
And the CLC, the biogenerator facility, do they have some of those?
Do you want to talk?
Culture, but that's not animal.
So if we have animal
List of equipment order.
But it things like I'm sure equipment.
Yeah, so if we have animal experiments planned, then we will have to go with
The university or
COI, make the JROC.
We go back and okay, multiple librarians that comes in the funds.
Now, I will say one plus to St. Louis, some people don't realize this, is that sometimes startups serve for sub-awards for other startups on SBIR, STTR. So if you have a company large enough, let's say like Blue Gene or something like that, where they're doing a certain model, they may be willing to give some access to their vivarium to do some studies. So you may not necessarily need a giant CRO or a university like lab that specializes in a certain model. So I've seen some startups trying to survive this last year and a half by helping each other out.
And
I was going to ask, along follow up on something you said about the company. Is it still the case that the company doesn't have to be formed at the time of submission, or has that changed? The company doesn't, when you say formed, so really all you really need is the EIA. So you don't necessarily need a full, charter, all that.
So in order to do your SAM.gov registration,
Yeah.
you need your paperwork of how your organization is set up. You need an EIN number. And then
It's not something I can say.
yeah, so there is some beginning stuff you have to have in order to, in a sense, be ready to do business with the federal government, because that's really what it's setting up, is the ability for the federal government to pay your business for a grant or a contract.
So this is on our attorney advice. So the question is, at the time you submit the proposal, that needs to be done.
Yeah, because your SAM.gov has to be done in advance of putting in the proposal, because you're going to be using a federal database to submit the application. And in a sense, there's like for most applications and most SBIRs, there's a series of federal databases that have to talk to each other, getting set up in all of these different accounts, which in a normal process is WashU is the applicant, right? So they manage all of that administratively. And that's what Jeneane is explaining, is that as a new small business, now you have your own independent role of being the applicant and managing that process administratively.
They could literally say, I'm the company. I know it used to be different. That's why.
Yeah. So the one exception I like to tell people, I'm a big fan of the National Science Foundation. I review for them, and I've had a lot of fun helping people get ready for it. Is that you don't have to have had your company formed or your registrations done to put in what's called an NSF project pitch. So you can wait and see, do I get invited before I start calling my registration? So that's the one kind of like exception.
And they're really designed for that 90-something% of their awards are usually the groups that are less than 4 people. But,
Yeah.
and it's really that fuzzy, I call it the fuzzy front end. That's what we call the Bristol-Myers Squibb, where it's like, we don't really kind of know we know it's a big problem we could solve, but it's pretty high risk. They like that kind of stuff. NIH is probably not going to want to touch that. So
Now, I have a follow-up for the physical space. Does it has to be secured before the submission, or we can propose it?
Oh, that's a great question. So I think Dave was kind of talking about like MTC, where you're talking about Missouri Technology Corporation. So other sources of funding might have some different rules, but in general, for a grant application, there are many aspects where you need to know what it's going to look like contract-wise and start that relationship with who you're going to collaborate with, in terms of a facility where you're going to operate out of, or even just a single office or a co-working desk, right? You just need to have a name and know what's involved and whether that's affordable for you. So you don't even need to have a quote for NIH, as an example, going in on how much it costs for you to lease that space. So you need to have had a conversation that you're going to sign a lease, and when your grant is awarded, and we're going to occupy this space, pay for it.
All right. And I bet you guys all know the answer to this question. Is it STTR and an SBIR a grant, or is it a company? Come on. This is about a business. This is not a grant. It's not the same. All right, we'll work on that, because I did not get a rousing response from that. Okay.
well, you need to start with like an R1.
It's not an R1.
It is. Some of them are grants, but they're
Right, yeah.
but they're really about granting. You create a business.
Yeah. And there's still some expectations more around the milestones. Like, what do you more like our bait should maybe go more involved into that? That's where you see more like SBIR, STTR milestones you have to meet. Whereas a grant, things can change throughout the grant period, and talk to your PO and shift focus. And the STTR and SBIRs are less sympathetic to that.
Some of the NIH solicitations will be a contract. And also, if you do that Department of War grant we're talking about, those are all going to be follow the contracting laws. So those are a little different. And those are going to be, we have an agreement in certain milestones in order, and you have invoice them. Where on the grant side, like with NIH or NSF, it's going to be they're going to send you 75% of the money. So as long as you don't commit fraud or something, you're not going to ask for the money back.
Yep.
You're going to get the remainder 25% with a report that says this is where we're at, and does it make sense to fund the rest of the project, or go. But where the contract is a lot different, and even when you apply, it's a different animal. So if you decided to go after defense medicine, as an example, that's going to be, so when you talk to the program officer, they be impacted by the way those laws are established in terms of the timing. So they'll go dark for a while, they keep updating and look at it. Or on the others, they won't. I don't know if you're going to talk to me about how we start this or not.
That was the next one.
Oh, okay.
Where do I find the offers, decisions, and timelines? So where do you find out about all these different habits?
So you remember when you watch commercial and at the end they have like all of this information right at the end that they say really fast, like so
There, yeah.
So I tell people definitely go and read a full solicitation or a BA or a NOFO, whatever the language is for that particular agency that you're looking at an opportunity. That's SBIR, STTR. Understand the rules for eligibility, understand what activities will be supported by the mechanism and what won't. What does the budget look like? Is it too small? Is it reasonable? Does it have a matching component, meaning that you have to come up with BC money? Or maybe they're allowing you to use another grant, a state or a federal grant to match with that one to be eligible for it. So really just trying to get a feel for, is this really a good fit for me? And then the last bit is Karen is saying is, what about the timeline? So a lot of people come with an opportunity that they're interested in. They say, hey, it's in a month. And if they were doing a typical R1 or R21, it's doable. Like they can do it. SBIR, STTRs are a little bit different because there are so many steps in front of it that are not writing. Okay. So registrations themselves, some people need 2 to 3 months to get those done because there may be some issue with how they filed the company. And there's some difference between the name, between the IRS and their company documents, right? So registrations themselves, I ask people that have 2 to 3 months. And then Karen's talked about a very important aspect around your market research and your market opportunity that you're thinking about in general. That all is in front of writing itself, meaning that you need to find some way to test your hypothesis that you know the solution to this problem, or you know who the customer is. There's often a lot of work people have to do to understand who the actual customers are. And I don't just mean the person paying for it. I mean all of the people involved in that problem that play a role in different decision points along the process. So all of those things are totally different than writing about the science of what you're doing as a solution, right? So that's something where, being part of venture fellows or working with an SBDC tech counselor or doing NSFI core, those are all steps where you're getting ready for building more strength and evidence that you have a solution that someone's going to buy.
Yeah, because what both NIH, but even more NSF, they want to understand that you understand who the market is. Is this commercially viable? Do you at least have some research? You don't have to have a full market research study, but you've probably done at least 50 to 100 interviews with potential customers and have a good sense of what really the problem you're solving. Where it gets complicated is if you're doing anything in healthcare. I spent 15 years in healthcare. It's a hot mess. You already know. Well, the problem in healthcare is there's multiple buyers, right? So yeah, the ER resident is all excited about this new cool tool that you can sell the ER. They don't make the decision. There's an ER manager, there's a buying agent, they're probably even buying to a buying group. Healthcare is just saying, we get all those widgets from, Cardinal Supply or whatever they call it. They read the names all merged. But, so they don't even care they just want them to have it in their stock in their warehouse, right? They're not going to buy it from you. So you have to understand all of that. And there's going to be people on the review panel that know that commercial market. So they can tell pretty quickly from your proposal, if you even talk to anybody, if you start saying, or the famous one is, we're just going to license this, to the big pharma. Well, that's a big animal, right? What part of big pharma? And if you actually talk to anybody to find out who's really interested in the indication or whatever you're working on, that type of thing. So that's part of that.
Yeah, and I'll throw in more a bit because the question I always get is how fast do I get my money? How fast can I get millions of dollars? Right? Yeah. So as an example, the agencies that most often give money the quickest is like defense itself. So DOD, DOW, that could be a pretty fast process, especially like I think AFWorks is one of the quickest. NSF also is typically 6 months, can be really quick. This last year with the they call it the SBIR drought between November and April, we had a lot of people that for NSF that went in last year, and it took a full year for them to get their money. So that's a lot longer than normal. But NIH is kind of the longer wait out for money. So that's one where for most people, it's going to be 9 to 12 months from when they put in their application.
If you're not sure where to start, if you go to SBIR.gov, you can actually go and look at what the past awards are. That's one of the simplest ways. The search engine's not as great as it used to be. It used to be a lot better. You could put in multiple words, but if you just go in there, ideally you have one word, that would be ideal. The federal government's not good at SEO apparently. So you have to put in that one word. You can actually go back and look at what the past awards were and get a sense of, hey, they seem to be funding this. And then ideally, you want to also know what the state of the art is. Because I have a lot of folks who will come to me, and I don't have a science background. I just simply Google or Google Scholar, and I find out, well, there's a guy down in Florida that's doing kind of similar research to what you're doing. And do you actually know what they're doing? Oh, we'll check that out. So I'm always shocked at how many people don't know. And again, the reviewers are going to know about that. So you're going to say, no, other people have already gone down that path, which is fine. But if you can say, hey, others have gone down that path, we have figured out some way to get beyond that. So I've got both the technical challenge I'm trying to overcome, and I have the commercial challenge, and those are really together. I think that's the secret sauce, I think, of a good submission is that comes together. That gives you a competitive advantage, your technical challenge that you overcome.
That sounds to me like your company is on service or offering some type of service. But if you're developing a therapeutic,
You still have to understand who your competitors are. You still have to understand the state of the art, because someone, as Ed is saying, you could say, we're just going to sell this therapeutic to big pharma. But what if your therapeutic, there are already like 3 blockbusters on the market, and there's really no difference in how your planned therapeutic acts relative to what is like blockbusters. However, if you understand that there are these horrible side effects on these market blockbusters anyway, and your drug doesn't have those side effects, or you haven't seen it so far in your animal models, then you have a reason to argue that we aren't just looking at big pharma, we're actually looking to supplant this giant market dominant drug for the reason that we think ours will be safer than what is out
or
there.
more long-term or more.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're going to need data.
Yeah. Correct.
But
Yeah.
Can we compare our data to what's previously already published? Or are you asking more that we have to do more investigation beyond what's
2 answers. You'd have the market research side of understanding what is on the market, but also what's in clinical trials, for example, like what are other methods or mechanisms that other drugs are acting that could come on the market. But then you also have what you're asking, which is, do you have data in hand where maybe you've compared your drug to some of these things that are on the market in animal models, if it can function that way, right, in that model? Yeah. So that's a big question, and reviewers are going to be asking the same question. Do you need more data to convince me of
I
that?
think they want preliminary data, but they don't want so much data that you've already proven it. Now you don't need the grant, right? So I think there is kind of a fine line there.
Yeah.
It's kind of vary, I think, by each.
What about the market data? It said that you needed something like 50 to 100 interviews with potential customers. Is that something you need prior to applying? Is that something that you can actually apply and say, we'd like the money to set up for some of those interviews during phase 1?
Yeah, unfortunately, they don't. There is a TABA fund that's not very much money. It's like $6,500 that covers market research. But typically, they want to see you have done at least some of that research. I would suggest you have to have all of it done. Remember, it's going to take 6 months for you to get the market. So you could have started that and at least show evidence that, hey, I've talked to this many people. We are going to still continue to research this. I think it's going to vary, but the more research you've done, the more competitive your grant can be. So, there may be other people that are going down that same path.
And I want to give you an out. I'm going to add on to Ed.
Yeah.
But I would say customer discovery is more important for like health apps and devices over like therapeutics as an example.
Yeah.
With diagnostic.
That might fall in the middle.
Yeah.
But where you still need to at least have kind of felt out a little bit maybe some of the diagnostic companies or hospital labs and their interest in this product,
Yeah.
or whether only you're the person seen as the big problem, or truly whether other people are interested in this new solution.
My rule of thumb is the more chemistry there is, the more you're going to probably interview more key opinion leaders, not necessarily end users. Is that is me?
Yeah, it's
It's like,
yeah.
it's not, you're not selling a bar of soap. You are going to have, but I think to get a sense of where the industry is going, I think those key opinion leaders are a quick place to start. And if you at least have some sense from them, a little bit like Veronika said, you can at least identify these are the 3 drugs that are in pipeline, and they already know they've been flagged for all kinds of problems. And these drug companies that are funding these are going to probably be interested in your concept. That's what they want. You want to be able to, connect the dots for them, not just say, we're going to license the big one. So I think that's weird. Even NIH historically used to not worry about commercialization plan, even though it's only a half page. I've seen grants not get funded. They said, love the science. We just don't see the physician changing their protocol. So we're not going to fund this. So that's part of that is understanding, who's going to write the order? Is Medicare going to cover this?
So just to give a little more specific detail, what Ed is saying is that we are talking over your questions, let us know. So if you're doing an NIH phase 1 as an example, there's a small section as Ed is saying, typically half a page, where you really are already presenting what your competitors are, your go-to-market strategy, your IP strategy, all of these things. So you really do have to be upfront about it already in phase 1. Even though that probably feels early for a lot of people, they're like, well, we're still testing the animal models to see if we even have an impact, right? Should we even chase it? But they already want you to have a heads up a little bit on like, what is the other standard of care? And are there other people trying to solve it in the same way we are? When you get to a phase 2 level, so let's say, for example, you've done extensive animal models on this new therapeutic and you think it has a good shot already, maybe you're going to go in for what's called a direct phase 2, where you're trying to put in for $2.5 million, because now you're actually ready to start like some tox work or study some dosing or something like that. At that level, NIH wants to see a 12-page commercialization plan, which is pretty exhaustive. And they're wanting you at that point to already be talking to customers and talking to investors. They're not necessarily saying you have to have investors yet, but you have to have started the process of understanding what is it going to look like to fundraise, find partners. If you're going to NSF first, where they're looking for more high-risk technology, you have a higher liability on you that you have to have a pretty strong market case for NSF to come at you without you providing much preliminary data. So in that case, it's 2 to 4 pages about your go-to-market strategy, your competitors, all of that. If you're going somewhere else, for example, like let's say BARDA or some of the other military ones, you're still most likely going to have to be doing at least a page or 2 about your post-transition plan or your commercialization strategy for whatever it is. If you're applying for something that is military like DOW, you're probably going to have to address what's your go-to-market for both the civilian market and solving to the military. So there are considerations very early on already at a phase level of what does it look like for us, even though that may be years from now.
All right. We truly won my questions. We will try to wrap this. So one quick disclaimer, because OTM gets this call. Will Office of Technology Management read your STTR? No. Yeah. Will we read your SBIR? No. Will we pay for it? Probably not. But welcome. What do you want to tell them?
Not going to pay for it. No.
Now, funny to see how associations and we're still there.
I'm Malcolm Towns. I'm the Director of Technology Development in OTM. So right now, as part of our work, we're trying to really understand some of the insights about the SBIR, STTR experience and putting together competitive proposals with the hopes of preparing programs and services to actually help to facilitate your efforts in developing competitive, successful proposals. So with that in mind, we're doing a small survey. And there's a QR code here up there. It's also on these takeaway sheets. A very quick survey. There's two groups that we're really trying to reach. So first group is anybody that has served as an evaluator for an SBIR, STTR panel with any agency. So if you know anybody in that realm, please direct them to the survey. They do not have to be with the WashU community. So if they're outside of the WashU community, it's fine. We want those insights as well. The other group are those that have applied for an SBIR, STTR, and it was not awarded. And we want to get feedback from those individuals as well to understand the feedback they receive from the agency about their proposals and what the issues may have been. And so again, if you know of someone, whether or not they're within the WashU community or outside of the WashU community, please direct them to the survey. It should only take no more than 5 or 10 minutes to complete. We're only asking a couple of broad questions to get that type of feedback back. And again, this is to help us with forming programs and services to help individuals prepare and just help and submit successful competitive SBIR, STTR proposals in WashU community. Also a note on customer discovery. So Ed mentioned that no, the government won't pay for that, and the funds that you have are very little. With the GAP Fund program that we have, we actually do regularly incorporate customer discovery as a component of the GAP Fund project. And one of the objectives of that program is to help researchers to be able to pursue and win larger grants for technology development. So if this is a WashU technology you're working on, you disclose it to OTM properly and all of that, then the WashU Gap Fund might be something that you want to think about pursuing and looking into to help with that technology development. That's correct.
Yep.
So, the other resource that we kind of quickly mentioned was Missouri Small Business Development Center. So they have a FAST program. They're the FAST awardee. I think they will be the FAST awardee again from October 1st. They offer $2,500 toward to hire someone like Veronika to actually help provide the grant. So that's another fund that during the process of actually placing, that was my old role here at St. Louis, and that process of replacing that person. So I have somebody here. We've got other counselors across the state. The other sister agency to the SBDC is the Apex Accelerators. They're the experts in SAM registration. So they can help you get set up.
Federal contracting.
Yeah, and also federal contracting too, if you want to do that. But I think most of you are probably not doing that. So,
And I forgot to mention something. So just in terms of when you are considering starting a company and applying for funding, and the URLs that you're getting through the materials, we have a whole guide. It's very lengthy. And it really goes through various questions, things you need to consider. It also helps you understand what's the approval path for those types of things, certain things that we may not allow. So it's pretty thorough. So I encourage you to go and check that out as well.
So on the site, on the OTM site, you can do the EIRS TTR Decoded. All of these QR codes are there. Thank you, Aaron. Links, there's materials there. Eventually, this will be on there. So you can listen to us talk about it again. Please reach out. Even though I won't read your grant, I will help you out. But I do not have any money. I'm the only person that's got money here. Welcome, Tana. But we are all about WashU's intellectual property startups. So having a disclosure, getting a patent track, those are all folks that we help. We help folks that are really early on ask and not yet about that. So we're here to help. I just can't read your grant, but I could do a lot of other things. So, all right. Thank you all for joining us. We have another one of these really soon, September 3rd. It's called From Research to Reality. Greg Markovich is going to be the moderator on that one. And then on the 8th of October, Practice Makes the Perfect Pitch. It may seem like you climbed Mount Everest the first time you pitch, but you're going to do that all the time. And so we've got folks that have been doing it for years now. Liz and her magic red marker will be here, and she'll tell you what will really get you in trouble on the pitch. And the quick answer is 10 slides that Dave's mother can read, right? That's the 92-year-old mother. She doesn't understand it. It's not going, it's not going in. So see, we're good people. All right. Thank you all.
And
Yeah, right. Okay. I think I understand.